Today I am joined by Aya Haidar, an incredible artist based in London who has worked extensively with the practice of stitching. Aya, I am so happy and excited to be speaking to you today, and I can't wait to dive into some of the issues addressed by your artistic and didactic work, which is complex and multidimensional in its treatment of labor, displacement, domesticity, womanhood, and memory. I find your practice fascinating because of its social diligence and its pointed engagement of craft practices. You position stitching as a way of writing, inscribing untold stories on dated found objects, whether this be in your personal artworks or in your workshops, where you provide participants with a framework to process and discuss their lives. Craft work, through its familial and folkloric character, its relation to the home and to memory, is much more accessible and close to a broader public than genres such as literature. As you express in your artist statement, you explore the fundamental elements of language that contribute to a story, and you do it through visual bodily means. This investigation also takes place during and through conversation and collaboration, reminding us that storytelling is a continual exchange in which we listen and we speak. Your practice is intrinsically human, and I recognize that from the first moment I saw your work. As you can do it better than anyone else can, I will now let you introduce yourself. I would love to know more about your upbringing, the experiences which have shaped your practice, and the issues which matter to you the most.
What an introduction. That's lovely. Thank you so much. That's a really it's really quite humbling. So thank you so much. Okay, so my upbringing. Well, I'm of Lebanese origin, so both my parents are Lebanese. And then during the civil war in the 80s, in 82, they fled Lebanon and got married in Jordan and then moved to Saudi Arabia. My mother then gave birth to me in America and then came back to Saudi Arabia, where I lived until I was 6. And then we moved to London. My dad's job relocated him to London. So I would say I'm raised in London, but I've got very, very strong kind of cultural roots in like Lebanese heritage, in the home, in language, in everything from food, culture, language, all of that is very much deeply embedded in me, even though I wasn't born or raised in Lebanon. Having said that, though, I did spend my life going back and forth between London and Lebanon, sometimes every 6 weeks. So it's a part of me that's very, very important. And so growing up, I grew up, even though my mum and dad, grew up in a very beautiful relationship and all this, I had a very, very firm kind of almost like matriarchal hand in my upbringing between my mum and my grandmother. And my grandmother, I spent a lot of time with my grandmother pretty much every day after school, every single weekend, and she would piece together my history, our stories, displacement, their move, migration, all of that, as she spoke to me, as we stitched and knitted together and stuff. So there's like the hand of the craft is so tied to kind of me trying to piece together my history and my heritage and that lineage. So that's really where the kind of craft element is rooted. But also historically, craft is something that is at least from kind of the culture that I'm from, is something so embedded in our culture. Historically, women would sit and cross stitch together or sew or knit while they spoke of everyday stories, and those stories live on because their children listen to them, who are at their feet, and then pass those on. So for me, craft is so much part of my upbringing and so much part of my roots, going even further back to my grandmother. That's and then I lived here, went to a French school where arts and kind of creative thinking, critical thinking was pretty much zero. So I went on to do a foundation course in art at Chelsea College of Art, which was a great stepping stone, kind of a great flavor into what different facets the art world can have. And then I went on to do a degree at the Slade, a BA at the Slade, during which time I did an exchange at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago, and I was introduced to the fiber materials department there, which completely changed my world, because it took craft, which for me was very much about the domestic, very much tied to my grandmother, and it transplanted it into the political, because I took courses like propaganda and decoration, and I learned how to silkscreen print, and I learned how to use a sewing machine properly and all of that, and it kind of moved the mending and repair element of craft to a much more conceptual platform. And then my work's always been very, very politically and socially engaged. So then I went on to do a master's degree at the London School of Economics, where that kind of political backdrop was really interesting for me, because it contextualized the stories that I was working on in a very different way. So a lot of the political, social elements that I was having conversations about and I was making work about was really through storytelling and personal experience. It was from my travels and experiences working with communities and my family, and then learning about the politics, kind of from a more theoretical perspective and a more perhaps maybe factual perspective. It was an interesting backdrop. And I did my master's dissertation in the role of art and democratization. So I was always interested in marrying the two sides together. Yeah. I think it's a constant evolution. So the issues that matter to me the most are really the lived experiences that I'm going through in that moment. So a lot of my work has to do with generational narratives in relation to my heritage. That is always a constant. Making work about migration and displacement, because that's really something that I always try to piece together about myself, but then also it's so topical, and I really find exploring those stories, those current stories, so interesting because of the cyclical nature of those politics. They don't change, they don't seem to change. But then as I became a mother, motherhood really kind of injected itself into what I wanted, into my discourse. And then that kind of, again, with a kind of socially and politically engaged thread, because I was interested in not necessarily, obviously motherhood is wonderful and I celebrate it and I am very proud of it, but I'm very interested in how the identity of women changes once they become mothers in society, particularly because our labor is not just is undervalued, unpaid, invisible, and it just seems to me absurd and mad. And I've kind of I kind of took on this new facet as a mother, where it's like this kind of subculture that nobody really talks about or does or appreciates, and it's pretty insane, even though we account for like half the population. So yeah, it's kind of my new fascination to explore as I journey through motherhood. So it constantly changes.
Yeah, it's very interesting how your personal experiences really marry with that of a very broad social groups. And I have two questions which relate to what you just discussed a little bit. So many of your artworks, you've made them throughout like the long term on a daily basis using ordinary materials. So could you tell us about working in a durational way? For instance, do you think that series created across several months on the daily, such as Highly Strung, allow the viewer to better grasp your experience as a mother and the conception of time as cyclical rather than just it's one moment in life, but no, rather it's something that continually happens and it doesn't only happen to you?
I think craft does that anyway, because it's unlike drawing or mark making. It is durational. It's so time consuming. I mean, you can work on something for months and, barely have anything to show for it. It is an incredibly, I'd say sometimes disheartening, but once it's done, it's so rewarding. So it's why I personally appreciate it so much. And when I look at textiles in general, I completely know and understand the labor behind it, the work behind it, the patience, the element of like care and I don't know, detail and endurance behind it. So for me, by virtue of just the material itself, it shows that with Highly Strung was a piece of work that took a whole year to create because it was 365 individual pieces. And, you know, where I made a record of an act of invisible labor, one for each day of the year. So there is that number attributed to it. It is about the duration of the whole year. And with but with that, for me, what's the kind of most poignant part of it is the sheer volume that you experience when you walk into the room. So yes, there are loads of individual pieces, and individually they're interesting because they pick up on each act that otherwise would go unnoticed. So in and of itself, it's interesting to kind of, look through them one by one. But when you walk into the room and it's all installed in its entirety, the sheer volume of it is something that kind of takes you aback. And then with that, you see the time is so much part of it. Another interesting thing about that work in relation to time is that because it's throughout a whole year, you see the progress of time. So because I was doing an act every day, one of them might be put on sunscreen on the kids. The other might be, I don't know, remember to put the sun hats on. But then further down the line, it will be wrap Christmas presents or wrap birthday presents or, whatever it is. So like you sweep up the leaves in the garden or whatever. Like you can really get a notion of seasons and time and aging and birthdays and celebration and all of those like milestones that we experience throughout the year as you walk in through the lines of the work. So yeah, that work, you didn't ask this question, but with that work, that's why it was really important for me not to break it up into individual pieces. So there were collectors that wanted to group it, but I felt really strongly about it being one whole body because for that reason, for time and to show that volume. As it happens, the Guggenheim have acquired the entirety of the installation, which I'm really happy about, and it will be permanently installed in the foyer. So people, in a bid to talk about domesticity and invisible labor, and I think a body of work that big has to be big. It has to be big because it's big and it's otherwise invisible. So it's really, really important as part of it. We've made a book of the work as well, like a big coffee table book, which again is really weighty and heavy, and the volume, the weight of the book is kind of talks literally about the weight that we carry as women, as mothers. That book it's a limited edition book, so it's an artwork in and of itself because that work sold. So I'm very proud of the book as well. So that kind of work takes on different facets again, but it's all about kind of durational element of the work, the weight of it, and the kind of invisibility of it.
It's very interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way, and congrats.
Thank you.
It's amazing.
Thank you.
And alternatively, also discussing invisible and material labor, I was wondering if you could discuss how certain aspects of creative labor, as you've briefly mentioned, are not discussed. And I'm also thinking here about In Witness Whereof specifically.
Yeah. So In Witness Whereof is a piece that I created in oh my God, I think it was 2018. It was commissioned for 2139, which was a big art fair in Saudi Arabia, where I was interested in this predates Highly Strung, actually. It predates Highly Strung. So this, where I was interested in looking at contracts and about the value of labor, the value that we place on labor. So in Saudi Arabia and in other parts of the Middle East, and actually all around the world, migrant labor is extremely exploited. There a lot of migrants have no rights and no kind of actual kind of worded documents that protect them in any way, and hence why they're exploited. And so I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to make a body of work about that, where I found a Pakistani migrant laborer and I discussed with him what would be a fair contract to hire him for his labor. He was a craftsperson, and a really skilled craftsperson. And so I asked him what he would want to produce a piece of work for me. And he said, we negotiated the price. He said it wasn't about giving him what he wanted first off. It was about negotiating what would be fair, what would not be fair, about times, so the hours that he would like to work. Essentially, he said he'd want to sit on a chair. He'd like to sit in a lit room, kind of the basics of basics, which in and of itself is the political statement. It's not that he's asking for a crazy amount of holiday or health insurance for him and his whole family and extended family and a house. And no, he's asking for a chair and a well-lit room and a lunch break and like the basic stuff that we all take for granted. And the work itself was him embroidering the contract. So he hand embroidered the contract that we both agreed to. It was massive. I believe it was like over 3 meters by nearly 2 meters. It was a massive piece of work. And then the borders I designed, which I got printed, which was kind of the map of Pakistan and the map of Saudi Arabia overlaid, so they looked like flowers from a way back from afar, but as you got closer, they were the maps. There was all these different signifiers of the contract. His hand signing the contract. So there were all these from afar. The border looked like this beautiful floral design, but actually, as you came closer, you saw that it was made up of all these different drawings of the things that alluded to the contract. So he created the contract. He embroidered the contract. I hired him for that, and he was embroidering the actual contract. So the aim of it was to talk about migrant domestic work. It was to talk about contracts, the importance of contracts, the importance of protecting your workers and making those workers visible. Yeah.
Amazing. I'm gonna go on to collaborative work, because in Witness we're off as collaborative in itself. So reading about your work, I've reflected on the sense of care and of taking time, which is mediated by craft practices such as stitching. There is a undoing of the ball of string and the slow process of writing something with it, which seems to provide a meditative experience in which we return to our memories and externalize them. So in the many workshops that you've done or in events where you've shared the practice of stitching, what effect do you think that it has on the participants of your workshops? For example, the one recently conducted at Leighton House for parents and carers.
The thing with craft, what I love the most about doing my workshops is that it it's about the conversation. It's not about the final product. It's not about like a life drawing class or something like that. It's really about the conversation. And like I was talking about earlier, where historically, women would sit together and craft as they spoke and shared and passed on their stories. That is the magic. So these workshops that I do with women, mothers, are important because we get to talk about, it's almost like therapy. We get to talk about, we create space to talk, and that space is not really existent in everyday society. We don't, unless you go see a therapist or you go see your mate, like to sit down together and make something creatively and share about our lived experience is not something people do. People don't stop anymore and have a conversation. I think it's all the more important nowadays in our society, because everything is so fast, because everything is so accessible online on your phone. You don't really slow down anymore. Everything is just has to be efficient, quick. Whereas this actually physically slows you down. You have to stop, and it's slow. You're embroidering, you're sewing. This is a very, very slow process. You're not drawing or making a quick mark or a painting or something like that. You are very, very slowly creating something that takes a long time, that needs patience. And you're talking about lived experiences, shared experiences that otherwise there isn't really space to share elsewhere. With the mothers group is an important one, is a really, really important one that I've done in several locations. And every single time mothers feel almost a sense of catharsis from it. And specific, I mean, you're quite young. You're not, I hope you're not a mum yet. You're very young, but it's kind of a world that I've only really started discovering. I'm young. My oldest is nearly 9, so I've not even been a mum a decade. But really, it's like this undercover world that you don't really see or experience unless you're in it. And when you're in it, there is, the Instagram life where you've got everyone who looks like a model and their kids are well behaved and everything's great, and then you've got the reality where you're waking up at 4 a.m. or you're having to do a bazillion night feeds, or someone's sick on the day that you have to do something, and there's all the mental load and the emotional and all of that. And it's a lot. It is so much. And women don't talk about it. We're not allowed space to share it because it's just assumed that we take on that role. And we just have this kind of beautifully painted image of motherhood everywhere else. And there isn't space to just stop and bitch about it. And actually, when we sit down, we talk about the difficulties. We actually feel that, oh my God, you're also experiencing that. That's amazing. And that's what's so magical about it, because we're actually sharing this lived experience that we didn't know existed, but all the same, whether it's about motherhood or anything else. At the moment, I'm doing a project with pensioners in Hackney, and what I'm interested in at Peer is PEER. Peer is an amazing institution in Shoreditch that does a lot of community work, a lot of socially engaged work, really grassroots stuff. And at the moment, they've got an exhibition about protest in East London. And so I'm working with this group of pensioners. And what I'm interested in is this same group of pensioners were the ones that were protesting back in the 50s and 60s in Hackney, where protest was that was the pulse of activism, And now that they're all pensioners, the same shit is coming up where it's, you have to heat your home, heat or eat, or, are you the fuel crisis, the cost of living crisis, all of that. I was looking through the Hackney archives and they're exactly the same articles, just change the date on them. It's the same cyclical nature of the problems that we've got. And so what we're doing is we're looking at the former protests and we're asking these old school protesters to create these amazing stitched protest banners about issues they want to protest about now. So we get together in a circle. We're not talking about motherhood, but we're talking about day-to-day issues that do affect us, whether it's heating our food, being able to afford this, not, living, all of that. And these are the same people. This is where, for me, social change happens. It happens in mothers groups, it happens in pensioners groups, it happens in where the working class people are, because they're the people who experience the hardships most. And so for me to have these sessions where we're talking about all this stuff, that is really that's where the pulse is of everything. The craft is almost like a platform, a kind of almost like I don't know, like an objective platform where you can just sit and busy your hands while you just talk and talk and talk. And so that's what I find really interesting. That's where the two meet,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also think what comes to mind when I think about the mother group, and an issue that's not often talked about, that I've only not experienced personally, but witness, is also kind of the pressure to find a good school for your children, which I think is something that's often placed on the mother in many cases. So this kind of links to my next question, which is, you've done projects for secondary schools and for children. So do you think the artists can kind of offer alternative ways of learning, which are different from traditional educational frameworks, which are also important? And maybe even you've recognized this with your own children, not only in those school programs.
100%. I really feel, not just in schools, I really feel that artists create culture. There is no doubt about that. Artists create culture, and artists present an alternative way of thinking that the mainstream just do not have, because we have we're problem solvers, and we create solutions for issues that I believe kind of there's almost like a bottleneck on. And because we talk, and because we move and we travel and we see, and we see things in a very different light, and I think we offer alternatives. And so definitely in schools, definitely in schools. So for me, I'll tell you about two things. One of them are the schools project. So talking about art, I mean, even my children and all the schools I visit, if I was to ask any of the students, and I've done this, name 3 artists, it will hands down always be Picasso, Dali, Magritte, or whatever. It will be a kind of dead white male. Like that is 100. I've never, and if it's a woman, it will be Frida Kahlo. Like that is it. That is the extent of art. And for them, art is a picture on a wall hung. There isn't the like they don't, first of all, they don't look at any artists from any subcontinent whatsoever for some reason. And secondly, not that that's, I mean, there's wonderful European artists, and I think that absolutely should be looked at and celebrated, but there also needs to be kind of an exploration into like more universal approaches to art. But then also art is not just framed on a canvas. Like art is installation, art is thinking outside the box, thinking creatively about how you can make a statement, a bold statement, using materials around you. So one of the examples is this boy. I asked, actually, in none of my sessions am I interested in skilled drawing or anything like that. So one of the things I asked them to do was look around you with all the materials that you've got in your room. I'd like you to make a statement, just make a statement about something that pisses you off about the system. And so one boy, I won't forget this, but he was always getting told off for swinging back in his chair all the time, like got detentions every week for swinging back in his chair. And what he did was he took every single chair in the classroom and piled it up into a massive wall, into a leaning back chair wall. And I just thought that was so genius. Like he was literally telling the teachers, basically sticking the finger up at the teachers and saying, this is the reason why I get a detention every week. Well, here you go. I'm going to make a big fat wall of leaning chairs. And I just thought that was so clever. Kind of, he created this installation out of materials that he found in the classroom, talk about the very thing that he's disgruntled about. And there were other things that students did and stuff. But I really think that when students are allowed to voice their opinions and make a statement about something, they're very clever and they can find ways to do it. And then they explore installation or sculpture or whatever it is to make those statements, you know. But one example I wanted to use about artists finding alternatives is a residency program that I did in Scotland, which was at Devon Projects, where I was invited along with an anthropologist to integrate 120 Syrian refugees into this tiny little town. And the local council couldn't find a way to integrate the Syrian refugees with the local Scots. And so they invited us to find a solution. They invited an artist and an anthropologist to find a solution because bigger government couldn't. And so what we did was we compared the two, and we watched them, how they lived, how they existed. We sat and watched and integrated and sat and had coffees and tried to understand who we were talking about. It wasn't pages on numbers. It was going out and seeing faces to names. So we saw that both came from very impoverished backgrounds. You know, the Syrians were fresh off the boat refugees, and the local Scots were going through the oil crisis. So there was high unemployment for both sides. Everyone was on benefits, you know, housed in local schools. All of that was exactly the same. But the main difference was that the Scots had very, very bad health, high levels of diabetes and coronary heart and disease and all of that, whereas the Syrians were very healthy. And the difference is that the Scots were eating processed food and the Syrians were eating fresh, like they were cooking everything from scratch. They didn't even have a single tinned anything. And that was the difference. And so we used the money to the art project, the creative outlet was in opening a restaurant, a cafe. And so we opened a cafe, and that was the project. Actually, on my website, you'll be able to see under residencies, if you scroll down, there's an 11-minute video, and you'll be able to see the video that we made if you're interested. But in that residency, what else we did was that the council were giving Syrians every week we're giving them English language lessons, and they were completely baffled as to why they were not learning English. They were like, what is going on? How can we resolve this? We forced them to come to lessons, we've punished them, we've not punished them, we've left it open, we've changed the times. Why are they not coming to the lessons? And actually what we did was, again, observe and talk and see and infiltrate and understand. And what we understood was that the Syrians, even back home, did that way of learning, of sitting at a desk and repeating at the blackboard, is not the way we learn in the Middle East. How we learn is just through talk and language. And so we scrapped the lessons and we introduced language in the wild, which is when I took the women to the local supermarket, to the bank, to the schools, to the opticians, and taught them practical language like, can I have a kilogram of tomatoes? Can I register for the GP? Can I take out £100? Can I blah blah blah? And the men went with the anthropologist Mark and learnt about the car so that they can pass their driving test, so they can then drive and be more independent, and learnt about mechanics and things like that, things that culturally they're more kind of affiliated to. And so that's how they started learning English. So artists talk and they converse and they understand the fabric of society, they embed themselves in it. And that's why I really believe that's how you can create lasting change, because artists see that change and resolve it in that way, rather than looking at stats and figures.
The project that strikes me most from your work, and actually I wanted to ask you about it, so thank you so much. And of course I'll link everything because I prompt everyone to look at all the projects you've done. I'll just ask a very brief final question. So you've participated in many events which celebrate Middle Eastern culture, such as last weekend. So who are some contemporary artists that you've discovered or met within the Middle Eastern community in London that you've found inspiring?
I mean, there's loads of contemporary Middle Eastern artists that I find inspiring, for very different reasons. Ones that are kind of that I hold a real kind of light to is definitely like Mona Hatoum. She's, for me, kind of the all-encompassing artist. I'm going to be in a show with her actually this summer, at Kettle's Yard in Cambridge, and then that's going to go to the Whitworth in Manchester. So I look forward to seeing you there. But she's definitely one of them. Emily Jassir is another one. Yara El Shabini, Ghada Amir is another one. There's loads of Marwan Rashmawi, loads of very Walid Raad, like loads of amazing contemporary Middle Eastern artists that are making work that I look up to, and that I really kind of, yeah, I guess I think I kind of I look at their trajectory, and also how they communicate things, how they vocalize it through their work, which I find so refined and smart and clever and very conceptual. And yeah, it's definitely something that kind of rubs off on my practice anyway.
That's a long list that I will
Yeah.
look at. I mean, you've talked about several things that you're working on, such as the collaborative work with the pensioners at Peers, or the coffee table book, or the exhibition coming up. But is there any upcoming projects, other ones which you want to speak about?
Yeah, so I've got, well, these two shows in the summer. The first one, it's called Material Power, which will start at Kettle's Yard in Cambridge, opening on the 7th of July until October. And then from there, it will move to the Whitworth in Manchester. Both of those will have public programs, which I'm involved in. There's the peer residency at the moment. And then I've got a really big solo show in Dubai opening in February next year, coinciding with Art Dubai. That is all brand new work, which I'm currently working on. And sneak peek. But the whole show is about womanhood. In fact, I'm titling it Battleground, and that is about women being battlegrounds, basically, for everything.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very feminist, very very, very charged show about womanhood, about motherhood, about feminism. Just yeah, and I think it's there's a lot of all of it is new work, so I'm really excited about that. What else is going on? Yeah, and then a few other kind of like small little projects on the side, but more kind of community projects. Yeah,
That's great. I'm looking forward to
great.
hopefully seeing several things. Thank you so much. I'll end the recording so I can say goodbye to you properly.